Welcome to Shadow Shorts. This is where every weekday at noon Eastern, I bring to you a thought leader, an expert, a doer in the realm of innovation for the built environment. My name is Jeff Echols. I am a senior advisor and the head of marketing for Shadow Partners. And today I am joined by David Rubenstein. He is the vice chairman at Savills. Did I have that right?
That is correct, here in Atlanta.
In
Great to be
Atlanta.
here, Jeff.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Before we went live, we were talking about all the ins and outs. Now you're focused on real estate. I'll say that, just very, very broadly, and we'll jump in or we'll dig in deeper into that. And obviously, one of the things that's happened over the last 3, 4, 5 years is, the elephant in the room is COVID. And part of the result of that is, hey, look, I'm sitting in my house right now in my office in my little studio, and it looks like you are too. Working is different today, which means that real estate, especially commercial real estate, must certainly be different today. So, when you're looking out at what you're doing every day and who you're helping every day and how you're helping them, what's different today? I know this is going to be playing a little bit Mr. Obvious here at the beginning, but what's different today than it was several years ago?
Sure. So, Jeff, it's just by way of background, I guess it's worth mentioning that sort of my focus at Savills is on office tenant representation.
Yeah.
So I represent companies that are looking for office space. Maybe they have office space, they need to get rid of it, they need to expand, contract, relocate. So we're all about helping users, occupiers of space. We don't represent landlords. You're not going to see a for lease sign with my name on it. That's just the sort of sector of the industry that we choose to play in and we focus on.
Sure. Yep.
So my perspective is really coming from a tenant or an occupier's perspective. Um, those are our clients, and those are the folks that we work with to help come up with a plan and execute on a plan as it relates to their workplace. So pre-COVID, I mean, so many things changed with the pandemic, and we could spend hours just talking about how it's impacted society, business, locally, nationally, globally. But for the sake of this discussion, let's focus really mostly on office space. Prior to COVID, the standard norm for the most part was, an employee is hired by a company. They come to work, they work 40 plus hours a week. They come to work 5 days a week. They go home on the weekends, at nights and on the weekends, and then the next week comes along and they start over. Well, obviously COVID changed all of that. It was really a shock to the collective system. Basically, companies and their employees figured out that there are a lot of ways to be a very productive employee and operate your business efficiently without always being in the office. As we talked about earlier, COVID was really the catalyst that moved us forward in a direction we are heading to anyway, with all the technology, in-office technology, video teleconferencing, technology that's used for employees that share workspaces. Everything was really advancing to help us get to this place. But COVID was really a shock to the system and just advanced us forward aggressively. And companies figured out that, yes, in fact, employees can be contributors to the organization without having to be in the office every day. That said, there's a lot of challenges when a company doesn't have their employees physically under their wings 5 days a week. It's hard to build culture. It's hard to mentor young people. It's hard to really create collaboration. I mean, I know Zoom, for example, is a collaboration tool, but maybe I'm a little bit old school, but there is no substitute for sitting face to face with a client, with your colleagues, with your superiors, with your subordinates. I mean, we are still humans. Real estate is still very much a people business. But with technology and with sort of the revelations that came about during COVID, I think people learned that yes, you can be productive without being in the office, necessarily 40 hours a week. And so there's a lot of ramifications that have sort of are resulting from that, and we're sort of helping our clients make good long-term decisions and really assess the best solution for their particular business and their employees.
That, all of that rings true, and I think anybody that's watching this or listening to this is going to say, "Yeah, that's my experience, and I see that, and that sounds right." What I think is intriguing, you mentioned technology, of course, right? It's Zoom, it's Teams, it's all sorts of tools to help us meet, help us communicate, theoretically collaborate, etc. So when you're representing your clients and maybe they're looking at a new space or maybe they're renegotiating space, something like that, what are you seeing on the client side in terms of the things that they're asking for that are demanding in order to make occupying space realistic going into 2024, 25 and beyond? I mean, I know you're talking about leases that are of some length here, right?
Yeah.
What is it that that you're trying to work into deals that's different today than it was pre-COVID?
So good question, Jeff. And there's a lot of factors there. I would say, yes, if you had to generalize sort of market wide, or if you sort of take an average of all companies in a given market, people are able to get by utilizing less space. They can be more efficient, and maybe don't have all their employees coming in all the time. As a result, they can either reduce the number of offices or decrease the size of the offices, decrease the size of the workstations. So people are able to justify leasing less space or projecting to lease less space than they have been. But at the same time, they've got their budget and they're running a successful business. So a lot of them are saying, hey, we can reduce our square footage, and for the same monthly real estate spend, we can upgrade our space, upgrade our neighborhood, upgrade our building, find the building that has the amenities that our employees are looking for. And so we call that flight. The term in the industry is flight to quality, and we're seeing that. We see it a lot in Atlanta. We're seeing it in most major markets. So you're seeing a bit of what's going on. For example, in Atlanta right now is sort of a world of haves and have-nots. The buildings that are well located, have the right amenities, are in a part of town that is highly sought after. They are outperforming the buildings that are on the fringes, maybe the buildings that don't have a lot of amenities, don't have anywhere that the employees could walk for lunch or to take a break during the day. So you're seeing the stark differences between buildings that are succeeding and buildings that are not. And a lot of it has to do with management's desire to find a building that will keep their employees happy, will make them come into the office, and will help them do all the things that you can do within the office. As I mentioned, build culture, collaboration, mentoring, so on and so forth. So it's a very, very deliberate process that our clients are going through right now to try and really figure out, okay, what do they want to look like? What do they want to be next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And it's a challenge. No, everyone's crystal ball is a little cloudy, just given what's going on in the world. We have a challenging economy. We have inflation. We have supply chain challenges. We have a presidential election coming up next year. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. So executives are really having to think a lot harder about their long-term real estate decisions than they did in the past. One other thing I'll mention, which I think is fascinating, is more and more the head of HR has a seat at the table. Typically, we dealt with, sometimes a company's big enough, they have a real estate executive, someone who's devoted to handling real estate. Maybe the CFO's involved, COO. Sometimes the CEO wants to, make his or her, intentions known. but we never really saw head of HR. Well, head of HR is driving things tremendously right now for most of our clients because, again, it's all about competition for labor, how to recruit and retain the best talent. So making sure, and heads of HR are the ones that are really most focused on the sort of employer-employee relationship. So they are playing a much greater role than they ever have.
That is fascinating. That it doesn't surprise me, but it is fascinating. And so you mentioned before the flight to quality. I've not heard that term before, and that I like that. It I think it's really self-explanatory. So you've got those fringe buildings, I think is what you called it, or fringe areas, maybe, maybe in the suburbs or, somewhere where I can't walk to lunch, the coffee shop is not there, or whatever the amenities that I want or I want for my employees, depending on the perspective I'm coming from. So, and you brought up the crystal ball. It's a good one. So if you look into your crystal ball, what does all this mean in terms of the built environment? Because if there's a flight to quality,
Mm-hmm.
and that means that maybe we're going to certain downtown areas, maybe we're going to Midtown. Those that are familiar with Atlanta, maybe there starts to be a focus and a consolidation in some of these areas. What happens in the fringe areas? Is there any hope for those facilities, those buildings that are out there? Does it start to completely change the neighborhood that they're in? What's the
I think
effect of
so. I
this?
mean, you're really touching on something there, Jeff. And we're seeing it in Atlanta. We're seeing it in most major metropolitan areas that have sort of a vibrant sort of suburban supply of office product, where there are buildings that aren't necessarily that old, some as recent as maybe 90s type deliveries,
Sure.
that are becoming what we might call functionally obsolete based on where they're located. And it's not that when I say fringe locations, it's not that they're not great parts of town. They're just not
Yeah.
great parts of town, maybe for or specific locations for office buildings. You have sort of this prototypical suburban office building that was developed in most major markets in the 90s. It's 5 or 6 stories. It's surrounded by a sea of asphalt. There's no amenities. There's nowhere you can walk to. The building physically itself is, probably fine, but it's really hard to attract tenants to buildings like that right now because, again, employers are looking for something different to get their people in. But so there are people that are looking at this and thinking, what, there may be a higher and better use for this land. The value of those buildings have dropped so significantly that you can justify going in, buying the land, raising the building, and converting it to something like multifamily or last mile industrial. E-commerce is, particularly with COVID, is really blossomed. And so it's about getting products to households in the shortest period of time, from when the time you click your computer to the time that it shows up at your front door. So there are needs for the real estate. It just may no longer be viable as a typical suburban office building. So I mean, we know groups right now that are looking at some suburban office product in Atlanta in hopes of converting the land to multifamily, which is, residential is, notwithstanding the fact that interest rates are where they are, there's still, overall generally a shortage of residential in this country to house, our citizens. So, generally, I mean, it depends on a market by market and where you're located, but there is a general need for more residential. There's generally a need for more last mile industrial. So, there's that opportunity to really rethink some of these office sites that maybe have a lot of fundamentally positive things going for them, but it's just they're not the office product that tenants are looking for today.
Yeah. So is that, one of the speculations, I think it started like immediately during COVID when offices shut down. People started speculating about converting office space into apartments or whatever. I'm guessing that that's not necessarily playing out the way those original.
Yeah, I mean it's a good point. I'm glad you raised that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It depends on the market, because if you look at sort of the efficiencies of floor plates, buildings that have been built, let's say since 1990 in this country, tend to have floor plates north of 20,000 feet. Sometimes, a 25,000 square foot floor plate is sort of prototypical for your suburb. Like I mentioned, the 5 to 6 story suburban prototype in a sea of asphalt. Well, they're typically about 25,000 square feet per floor. Well, that doesn't lend itself really well to convert to multifamily. But if you go in town, in certain markets where you have older buildings, 10,000, 8,000, 12,000 square feet, those are perfect for residential conversions. You have the challenge that they're older, their systems may not be as current. It may require a lot of renovation costs, but at least physically you can make that work for multifamily. If you were to do that on a typical 25,000 square foot floor plate, you'd have so much dead space inside the interior of the building that doesn't have, window access. It makes it really tough.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. It makes a lot of sense. So it'll be interesting. Obviously, this story will continue to unfold, and it always has evolved, right,
Yes.
over time, and changes in taste and everything else. So one last maybe avenue to explore we've talked about the technologies, or you touched on technologies. Is there anything that has surprised you about the rise of technology? And maybe specifically when your client comes in, you're looking at a specific office product, let's just say, and your client's coming in, you're representing them. They say, we have to have this technology, or we have to have this. Is there anything that's surprising in the last, I don't know, even in the past year or two, that's starting to drive decision making?
Look, of course, everyone's focused on, what kind of, fiber or high-speed internet access a building has, but that's almost table stakes at this point. If you don't have good internet in an office building, you're going to be out of business. So that's, at this point, almost everybody has that, at least of the quality buildings that are really in competition these days. We have seen, not as much in Atlanta, but other markets, a greater focus on sort of the environmental conditions of the office space, how many airflow changes are taking place, and there are different certifications. I mean, most people are familiar with LEED certification, which is expensive and cumbersome, but there's a lot of other types of certifications and qualifications designations you can get as a building owner. You could have your building, designated as a well building, a LEED building. There's just different types of categories of sort of different levels of green or environmental friendliness that a building can offer. And I think during COVID, a lot of people were very obsessed about the quality of the air they were breathing, and are they breathing in germs from other employees in their space or other spaces that could potentially be contagious. I don't know that that's quite, I mean, I think that was a little bit of sort of a result of COVID and just the uncertainty of what COVID was and how it was spread and how dangerous it was. That being said, there's still, particularly among big corporates, a focus on understanding sort of the environmental qualities of a building. So I don't know that that's technology directly per se, but technology is very involved with, making greener buildings, and it's, good for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So to wrap this up, and look for the big takeaway. Um, Maybe thinking about it in terms of investors, maybe it's the property owners, which is the other side of the table
Mhm.
from where you sit. But what would be the advice or the big takeaway for somebody that is looking at the future of commercial real estate? From the point of view of what we're talking about today, the tenants, what the tenants are asking for, what the tenants need, et cetera. If I'm an investor or a developer, owner operator, whichever role on that side of the table, what's the big takeaway from this? What do I need to be thinking about or planning for as we look at 2024?
Well, to be honest, right now, what's on every landlord's mind are the capital markets. So right now, interest rates have gone up very aggressively to combat inflation, or the Fed has raised interest rates, which means borrowers are spending more to borrow money. Um, Lenders, particularly in office product, have uh, become a lot more stricter in their underwriting. So they're valuing their office buildings at lower amounts. So you're trying to get a loan or refinance a loan. Your building is quote unquote worth less, at least according to the lending community. Your interest rates are higher. They're more conservative on their underwriting, so their loan to value may be lower. So, I mean, to use a phrase, cash is king.
Hmm.
The more equity in a building, the more stable it is these days. These buildings that were highly leveraged as the economy was just blowing and going in the teens, and now they had ridiculously low interest rates, and were able to finance a major component of their development costs or their acquisition costs. Now all of a sudden they're going back to the lending community and realizing that it's not going to be as easy this time. And so that's where you're seeing, I think we're going to see a number of buildings, particularly those buildings we were talking about, those sort of fringe, maybe suburban buildings that can't seem to bring in any tenants. There's going to be, those owners are going to have a hard time holding on to those assets. Their cash flow is down. Interest rates would be going up if they could even get a loan. And it's really difficult to get equity and debt to the table in this environment. A lot of people are just like, no more office. Don't want to own office. Don't want to invest in office. Don't want to make a loan on office. Just they want to stay away from now and wait for sort of the dust to settle. So I think the owners that succeed are the ones that have cash or have lower leverage and can afford to provide the amenities that today's tenants are demanding. And that's going to distinguish the winners from the losers, I think.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So, David Rubenstein, Vice Chairman of Savills North America, based in Atlanta. Thank you very much for this conversation. Thanks for sharing your experience and what's going on in this commercial real estate market. It is fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of dynamics that none of us have ever seen before, I guess. And
hey,
in a
myself
way,
included. I mean, I'll tell you. I mean, we are we're located in every major market in North America. We've got offices in Asia, in Europe, and 40,000 employees across the globe. And I would say for the most part, all of us who are involved in the office end of the business are experiencing things for the first time. And
yeah.
this is a new paradigm, and we're pivoting and trying to learn how to deal with it and help our clients manage through the process.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's exciting in a way. It's scary in another way. But this is what we're paying attention to, right? It's how things are changing and looking for ways to innovate. So thanks very much for taking the time out for this
Thank you,
conversation
Jeff.
today. Appreciate it. And I think our listeners who are focused on the commercial real estate side and specifically on the office side um, have some good takeaways from this today. Appreciate it.
Excellent. My pleasure.
Great. And for those of you that are listening today or watching today, thanks for joining us. We'll be back again tomorrow with another